telling Canadians that the problems they're facing with increased affordability, increased prices on everything, difficulty buying gas, difficulty buying computer, they've shrugged and said, oh, it's just inflation. Well, it's not just inflation.
And Mike, questions will be directed at former Statistics Canada Chief Economic Analyst Philip Cross. Mr. Cross, when Mr. Trudeau took office, you could buy the typical house for $434,000, according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. Now it's $811,000. That's an 85% housing inflation in just 6 years. Last year, home inflation hit 25%, which Real Estate Association chief economist called, quote, the biggest gain of all time, end quote. Do you believe that the $400 billion of newly created cash that the government, through the central bank, pumped into the financial and mortgage markets, and the resulting negative real interest rates on variable rate mortgages had an impact on the record-smashing housing inflation Canada witnessed last year?
He said, even after how just incredible.
Said, oh, it's just inflation.
Just incredible.
Said, oh, it's just inflation.
Just incredible. Even after house prices increased by a third, he didn't think about monetary policy.
Oh, Mr. Cross,
you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to unmute. I don't think there's any question it had a contributing and a large role. I think part of the problem, I think Mr. Perot put his finger on it, is that in this country, the federal government operates on a lot of the levers that control housing demand, notably through interest rates and immigration quotas, and yet the supply of housing is controlled at the provincial and local level. And we've had an enormous amount of stimulus go into housing. We've seen a big shift in consumer spending from services to goods. And obviously, that's created a lot of inflationary pressures.
Right, and as Mr. Perot did say, housing inflation is homegrown. Bloomberg reports Canada has the second most inflated housing market in the world. Vancouver is the second most unaffordable, and Toronto the fifth most unaffordable market on planet Earth, according to Demographia. Obviously, this is bizarre because Canada has among the most abundant supply of land on planet Earth. So it's strange that we would have such difficulty housing our people, or that we would be experiencing such inordinate house price inflation. Can you blame the inflation in land prices, Mr. Cross, on supply chain bottlenecks?
Well, certainly going back to, that's particularly a problem at the local level. It seems to be especially a problem in areas like Toronto and Vancouver, where land is constrained or contained to certain areas, and the local governments have been reluctant to increase supply, but we've also seen demand increase sharply.
Right.
So it's not just a matter of supply. We've seen demand increase sharply. This goes back to 2015 when the Bank of Canada first lowered interest rates. If you look at graphs of housing prices in Vancouver or in Toronto, they weren't doing anything exceptional before 2015. The minute we cut interest rates in 2015 and the oil boom stopped in Alberta and people immigrants stopped coming to Canada, going through Toronto and Vancouver, and then on to Calgary, they just stuck into Toronto and Vancouver, and we saw prices in those areas start to explode in 2015, and it's just continued ever since.
Right now, you can get a variable rate mortgage for 1.6%, which is 3 points below inflation. In other words, we have negative real rates. We're paying people to borrow big sums at variable rates with very low down payments. Is this contributing to inflating the housing prices?
Again, I don't think there's any question. I mean, there's been an attempt to tighten those rules, to increase down payments, to pass stress tests. Can you afford your mortgage at higher interest rates? But obviously that's been over. People have been able to find other sources of finance, particularly the bank of mom and dad, that has easily circumvented these attempted regulations.
Right. Banking rules, mortgage insurance, monetary policy, money laundering are all federal. So is housing inflation here and now under this government. That's what some people are calling it, just inflation. I won't ask you to comment on that. But do you believe that the fact that we have discouraged energy development in Canada and also flooded the economy with extra cash may have devalued what would otherwise have been a stronger Canadian exchange rate and therefore reduced what would have been stronger purchasing power for internationally priced goods?
That's an interesting point. I mean, there was a lot of talk about Canada being a petrocurrency, particularly during the run-up of the dollar to parity in the 2000s. Over the last year, we've seen oil prices recover substantially from record lows to $85, $86. And yet you look at the dollar today and it's sunk below 79 cents again. So clearly the exchange rate is not demonstrated the linkage to commodity prices that we've seen in the past.
You used to be that point. You used to be able to get. It used to be that you'd have the Canadian dollar to the U.S. would be about a penny to the dollar of the oil price. So if oil was at $100, you'd have parity. If oil was at $90, Canada's dollar would be at 90 cents. But that linkage has been broken, and we're no longer increasing the value of our dollar as oil prices go up. Which means, of course, when we buy internationally priced goods that end up in our grocery shelves or in our living rooms, we have a weaker purchasing power with which to do it. Do you agree that might be one of the reasons why Canada has 30-year highs in its inflation?
Very short answer, Mr. Cross, 20 seconds.
Unquestionably, there's something like 1/3 of the CPI is imported. So there's going to be a direct impact there, particularly in high visible areas like food and energy.
Minister's response was just incredible. He said, even after how just incredible.
Said, oh, it's just inflation.
Just incredible.
Said, oh, it's just inflation.
Just incredible. Even after house prices increased by 1/3, he didn't think about monetary policy.